season about what Jesus and his resurrection brings. The first week we talked about that Jesus' resurrection brings his presence as he came into the midst and the presence of those followers of his who had gathered in the upper room that night of Easter and so forth. And then he comes back again, and the first words that he says to them is peace and so forth. So Jesus' presence brings a sense of peace and joy and so forth. Last week we looked at what Jesus brings, and we talked about how Jesus brings a model, and we talked about the Good Shepherd, and how Jesus is the Good Shepherd with a person with integrity, and a person who brings a sense of intimacy and a sense of care and so forth. And today we're looking at this scene on the last full day of Jesus' life, and as you can see on your outline and see up on the screens, Jesus brings direction to our lives. Again, he begins this portion which says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." What happens when trouble comes into our lives, when challenges come into our lives? Well, oftentimes we get overwhelmed, don't we, huh? Oftentimes chaos dwells in our lives. Oftentimes we feel overwhelmed and we feel disoriented. Because what happens when trouble comes in our lives, more often than not, is that we focus on the trouble rather than focusing on what the answers are in our lives. And so he's inviting us here in this portion of Scripture not to look at the trouble, because as it says in the second half of that screen there, it says, in this world, this is a couple chapters later in chapter 16, Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, but be encouraged. I have won the battle over the world. I have overcome those troubles, in other words. And we see that in the resurrection. We see that as he overcomes death and so forth. Because trouble, when we have that in our lives, more often than not, I get tunnel vision, and all I can see is that problem. And I can't see the solutions to that problem. But when I focus on Jesus, he brings those answers, he brings the solutions to the fore, and so forth. And he wants us to know that. And that's what he's doing there. But sometimes life just seems really difficult, and sometimes we end up giving up, don't we, huh? I'm reminded of the story one of my favorite authors, Chuck Swindoll, tells a story about a fellow by the name of R.D. Jones. And it has to do with a typographical error in a classified ad that he posted in a small town newspaper. And things went from bad to worse, quite frankly, in this. So on Monday, he posts this ad, and it says this: for sale, R.D. Jones, because it was a small town, has one sewing machine for sale. Gives the phone number, says call after 7 p.m. and ask for Mrs. Kelly, who lives with him cheap. Well, when he saw that, he said, that's not right. And so he talks to the newspaper. They post a notice. Notice, we regret having aired an R.D. Jones ad yesterday. It should have read, one sewing machine for sale, cheap. Phone number, gives that. Ask for Mrs. Kelly, who lives with him after 7 p.m. Well, he sees that and he calls the newspaper again. Wednesday morning, they post this notice. R.D. Jones has informed us that he has received several annoying telephone calls because of the error we made in this classified ad yesterday. His ad stands corrected as follows. For sale, R.D. Jones has one sewing machine for sale, cheap. The phone number, after 7 p.m. call after 7 p.m. and ask for Mrs. Kelly, who loves with him. Thursday morning, the newspaper has one more correction. Notice, I, R.D. Jones, have no sewing machine for sale. I smashed it. Don't call on the following phone number, as the telephone has been disconnected. I have not been carrying on with Mrs. Kelly. Until yesterday, she was my housekeeper, but she quit. You know, some days are just like that, huh? Some days are just like that. And undoubtedly, Jesus is sort of feeling that way as he says to he says to Thomas, and he says to the whole group, hey, you know the way to where I'm going. And Thomas, in the reality of his life, he says, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? How can we know the way, Jesus? And that's when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. You see, we're asking the question throughout the season of Easter, hey, where do we go from here? Yes, we've had the resurrection, but where do we go from here? And today, Jesus says, he says these words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He's saying, who are you following? Who are you following? He's also saying, who do you trust? Where do you find the truth? And he also asks, where do you find the life? In other words, what direction are you headed? What direction are you headed? And on your outline today, we want to talk about that, you see? We want to talk about it. First of all, Jesus says, I am the way. I am the way. And then he goes on to say, and the truth and the life. Well, why does he say, I am the way? Well, in the Old Testament, and for Judaism for several thousands of years prior to Jesus, Jews referred to the path toward God as the way. For instance, in Deuteronomy chapter 5, look what it says there, and I printed it out. Israel, you must carefully obey the Lord's commands. Follow them because they make a path or a way, you see, that will lead to a long, successful life in the land the Lord is giving you. And Isaiah writes, whether you turn to the right or to the left, you will hear a voice saying, this is the road, or this is the way. Now follow it. And the psalmist writes, teach me to follow, Lord, and lead me on the right path, or the right way, because of my enemies. You know what the earliest name for Christianity was? It's recorded in Acts chapter 9. The earliest name for Christianity was the way. The way. The way to God. The way to be closer to God. And that's why Jesus says he is the way. He is the way. Ladies, I want to ask you a question. When you have to go to Home Depot, whether your husband's asked you to get something or you go yourself, don't you love it when you ask somebody the question, hey, where can I find this or that? And they say, hey, follow me and I'll take you there, huh? You know? I'm not going to even ask the guys because we never ask that question. Where is this or that? We'd rather walk 10 aisles and looking for it than to ask somebody a question, okay? For directions, all right? But ladies, don't you ask, go to, hey, follow me right here, huh? That's what Jesus is saying here. I am the way. Follow me is what he's saying. And that's so much better. That's so much better. Don't you hate it when somebody gives you a long list of directions? The other day I was going to see one of our members, and so I put their address into my phone, into my iPhone, okay? And, you know, it started taking me in circles on the wrong side of a road that I was supposed to be on the other side of, you know? Years ago, my aunt and uncle, they live on a farm up in South Carolina. We were just up visiting them, Kathy and I, a couple of weeks ago. And they're in a farm that's in a little town. Any of you ever hear of Norway, South Carolina? No, I figured. It's a blinking light, okay? There's a blinking light there, and that's about it. And so the first time I went there years ago when they first got this farm and built a house on it and so forth, my uncle was giving me directions, and he said, you turn left after the second branch. Does anybody know what a second branch is? Some of you might. I mean, a branch, at least in that part of the country, is a stream that goes off, okay? And so you come down in this lower part of the road as the road's going up and down, and so and you turn left right after that, and sure enough, there's this farm right there. But I got lost. He had to come get me, you know? And that's not unusual. You see, some people believe that Christianity's really difficult. You got to do this and this and this and this and this and this. All these directions. Jesus is saying, follow me. He's saying, I am the way. And that's what he's inviting us to do. I am the way. to follow his model. Last week we just talked about the model that he gives us. He's inviting us to go his direction, to be that way. Secondly, he says, he is the truth. He is the truth. And the scriptures talk a lot about the truth. The psalmist writes in Psalm 86, "Teach me to follow you, and I will obey your truth. Always keep me faithful." Psalm 119, "I have chosen the way of truth. I have obeyed your laws." In Psalm 26, "I see your love, and I live by your truth." I get Time magazine every week, my wife and I do, and this was on the cover here just a month ago, less than a month ago now. "Is the truth dead? Is the truth dead?" I don't know about you, but I tell you what, I get tired of hearing from politicians, quite frankly. And they were questioning whether truth is dead. Well, I know truth is not dead because the person who embodies truth is quite alive. That's Jesus Christ. Now, the reality is, quite frankly, is that I'm a hypocrite. Okay? I can talk about truth, but my body, my life doesn't always reflect truth. Okay? As I was studying for today, William Barclay, who is a wonderful commentator. In fact, we have his commentaries in the library. I invite you to check some of them out. But listen to what he says in regards to this. He says, "Many men have told us the truth, but no man ever embodied it. There's one all-important thing about moral truth. A man's character does not really affect his teaching of geometry or astronomy or Latin verbs. But if a man proposes to teach moral truth, his character makes all the difference in the world. An adulterer who teaches the necessity of purity, a grasping person who teaches the value of generosity, a domineering person who teaches the beauty of humility, an irascible creature who teaches the beauty of serenity, an embittered person who teaches the beauty of love, is bound to be ineffective. Moral truth cannot be conveyed solely in words. It must be conveyed in example. And that's precisely where the greatest human teacher must fall down," he writes. "No teacher has ever embodied the truth he taught except Jesus. Many a man could say, 'I've taught you the truth.' Only Jesus could say, 'I am the truth.' The tremendous thing about Jesus is not simply that the statement of moral perfection finds its peak in him. It is the fact that of moral perfection finds its realization in him. Jesus is the truth." The fact of the matter is that, quite frankly, all of us are hypocrites, aren't we, huh? In that reality. We're all hypocrites. When people say to me, "Oh, I don't want to go to church, it's full of hypocrites," I end up saying, "You know what, you're absolutely right, and what's one more?" You know? Because we're all hypocrites. That's the reality, you see? And we know that when we're honest with ourselves. But Jesus not only talks about the truth, he lives the truth. He embodies the truth. That's why he can say, "I am the truth." And finally, Jesus is the life. Jesus is the life. You see, he says, and this was in last week's text, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. In other words, to bring chaos, to bring disorientation into our lives. That's what Satan wants to do, is to bring chaos into our lives, you see. But he says, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." And have it to the full. The writer of Proverbs says, "Whoever accepts correction is on the way to life, but whoever ignores correction will lead others away from life." You see? And the psalmist writes, "You make known to me the path of life." You see, we all want life, don't we? We all want the fullness of life. And I thought it was so interesting, that last song, I think it was, that we just sang, it talks about that. It talks about, I bought the world and I sold my heart. What a line. That's just beautiful. And that's true so many times for all of us. We want to buy the world. We want all those things. And we end up selling our heart. You make known to me the path of life. You fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. You see, love, the reality is, love brings life. And Jesus brings love and consequently life. I want to conclude by sharing a brief story with you. About years ago, about a wealthy man who he and his son shared a passion for art collecting. And the older man, the father, was widowed, and together he and his son traveled the world looking for some of the finest art treasures in the world. And they had all kinds of paintings in their home. They had a Picasso. They had a Van Gogh. They had a Monet, and they had others that adorned the walls of their family estate. And the elder man looked on satisfaction at his son, who became an experienced art collector. The son's trained eye and his sharp business sense caused his father to beam with pride as they dealt with art collectors from all around the world. As winter approached, there was a war that was engulfing the nation. And the young man left to serve his country. And after only a few short weeks, his father received a telegram that his son was missing in action. The art collector anxiously awaited more news, fearing they would never see his son again. And within days, his fears were confirmed. He was told that his son had died while rushing a fellow soldier to a medic. Distraught and lonely, the old man faced the upcoming Christmas holidays with anguish and sadness in his heart. The joy of a season that he and his son so looked forward to, would visit his home no longer. On Christmas morning, however, a knock on the door awakened the old man, who was depressed. As he walked to the door, the masterpieces that lined the walls of their home only reminded him of his son, and that his son wasn't coming home. As he opened the door, he was greeted by another soldier, a soldier with a large package in his hand, and he introduced himself by saying, "I was a friend of your son's. I was the one he was rescuing when he died. May I come in for a few moments?" He says, "I have something to show you." And the two began to talk, and the soldier told how the man's son had rescued him as well as others. And he also mentioned that he knew of his son's love of art, and he in fact then shared that he too was an artist, this young soldier. And he said, "And I want to give this to you." As the old man unwrapped the package, the paper gave way and revealed a portrait of the son. Though the world would never consider it a great work of art, a work of a genius, the painting featured the young man's face in a striking detail. And overcome with the emotion, the man thanked the soldier, promising to hang it over his fireplace. And a few hours later, he fulfilled that promise as he went about that task. True to his word, the painting went well above the fireplace, pushing aside all the other paintings in the home. And as the man sat in his chair on that Christmas night, gazing at the gift that he had been given, during the weeks that followed, the man realized that even though his son was no longer with him, the boy's life lived on because of those that he had touched in his acts. He would soon learn that his son had rescued dozens of wounded soldiers before that bullet stilled his heart. As the stories of his son's gallantry continued to reach him, fatherly pride and satisfaction began to ease the grief in his life. And the painting of his son soon became the most prized possession in the whole home, far eclipsing the great works of art for which the museums clamored. He told his neighbors it was the greatest gift he had ever received. The following spring, the old man became ill. Before long, he passed away. The art world was in anticipation of being able to buy those works of art. Mindful of the story of the man's only son, but in his honor, those paintings would be sold at an auction. According to the will of the old man, all the works would be auctioned on Christmas Day, and the day he had received the greatest gift that he ever had. The day soon arrived, and art collectors from around the world gathered, even though it was Christmas Day, to buy the most spectacular paintings in the world. Dreams would be fulfilled on this day. The auction began with a painting that was not on any museum's list. It was the painting of the man's son. The auctioneer asked for an opening bid. The room was silent. Who will open the bidding at $100 for this painting? Minutes passed in silence. No one spoke. From the back of the room, someone shouted out, "Who cares about that painting? Let's get on with the really good stuff here." And more voices echoed the same sentiment. "No, we have to sell this one first," replied the auctioneer. "Now, who will take the son?" And finally, a friend of the old man spoke, I'll put $10 for that painting. That's all I have. I knew that young man, so I'd like to have it." "I have $10, the auctioneer cried out. "Will anyone go higher?" After more silence, the auctioneer said, "Going once, going twice, gone for $10. And the gavel fell, and cheers erupted as someone exclaimed, "Now we can get on to the real treasures." The auctioneer looked out at the audience and announced that now the auction was closed. Stunned disbelief quieted the room. Someone spoke up and asked, "What do you mean it's over? We didn't come here for a picture of some old guy's son. What about all these other paintings? There are millions of dollars of art here. I demand that you explain what's going on." The auctioneer replied, "It's very simple. According to the will of the Father, whoever takes the Son, he or she gets it all. Whoever takes the Son gets it all." Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Whoever gets the Son gets it all." In Jesus' name, amen.